The ITIL technical management practices, as I mentioned before, are practices that originated in technology groups and have been adopted within ITIL because they have significant service management contribution to make. There are three of them, which are deployment management, software development management, and infrastructure and platform management. But the only one that we need to know about for the ITIL exam is deployment management. The only thing that you will be examined on from this practice is that you know the purpose of deployment management. So, the purpose of the deployment management practice is to move new or changed hardware, software, documentation, processes, or any other component to live environments. It may also be involved in deploying components to other environments for testing or staging. So, deployment is actually moving things, whereas release is making things available to users. And that is an important distinction that you need to understand. The reason they're separated is because of the fact that we have a lot of automated deployment pipelines in many organizations nowadays, where making software ready for deployment is completely automated, and often the actual deployment is automated as well. But the release is done as a business practice sometime later. The other information on this slide is for your information because we thought you might find it interesting and because just learning a lot of purpose statements one after the other will be very tedious for you to learn and for me to teach. As I said, deployment works closely with release management and change enablement, but it is a separate practice. Some people call it provisioning. I don't care what you call it, I just care that you do it and you manage it properly. There's a couple of different approaches described here. Phased deployment is where components are deployed to just one part of the production environment, and after we've established that it's stable, we deploy it to the next part. Typically, that would involve deployment to one office at a time or to one country at a time or something similar. Continuous delivery is where we take a component, usually software, but it can involve hardware, especially virtual infrastructure, and we use automation to integrate all of the components together, test them, and make them available so they can be deployed at any time they are needed. Continuous delivery does not actually deploy the components, it just involves integrating, testing, and making ready for deployment. And then there's continuous deployment, which uses the same acronym, CD, and that takes it to the next stage. Components are integrated, tested, and deployed. This could happen tens of times a day or even hundreds of times a day in some organizations. With continuous delivery, you may do the deployment slightly less often under more business control. We have big bang deployment. This is where you just deploy the whole thing in one go to every place that needs it. This is often done with legacy type applications where they're dependent on a database change where you have to change the database and all of the components at the same time. With more modern services and solutions, they tend to manage a better level of isolation between the front-end components and the back-end, so that's less necessary. And the other one, which is quite important to think about and will continue to be very common, is the pull deployment. And this is where we only deploy to a repository and then users pull things when they want it. And the obvious instance of that is the apps on your mobile phone. The deployment done by the people who control the app is simply to an app store. The actual deployment to your phone is done under your control as a pull deployment when you choose to do it. Now, you may have set your phone up to do auto updates, in which case the pull deployment might be requested by the infrastructure rather than, well, by the client device rather than by the user, but that's still a pull deployment. Components available for deployment should be maintained in one or more secure locations to ensure they are not modified before deployment. The number of times we've seen that somebody managed to load something that shouldn't have been there into an app store is really scary. And if those stores were not well protected, I promise you that would be very, very much more common. These locations are collectively referred to as a definitive media library for software and documentation and a definitive hardware store for hardware. What can I say? There's lots of tools that support deployments. They're often integrated with configuration management, and they'll often help you with your audit and change management. Most organizations have tools for deploying client software, and these may be integrated with the service portal to support a request management practice, especially for PCs and Macs, for laptops and desktops. We tend to have portal type automated deployment, and for phone apps, we tend to have App Store type deployment. Okay, thank you for attending this ITIL 4 Foundation e-learning course, which is a preparation course for candidates taking the official AXELOS ITIL 4 Foundation exam, which is conducted by PeopleCert. One World Training is an authorized training provider for all modules of ITIL 4, Prince2, Prince2 Agile, PeopleCert Scrum Master, PeopleCert DevOps, and Service Desk Institute courses, including Service Desk Analyst V8 and Service Desk Manager V8, and many other courses. All courses offered by One World Training are available via e-learning and live online. For enrollment queries, you can contact info, I-N-F-O, at oneworldtraining.com, as you see on this slide. If you've got any questions about anything you have learned on this training course, then you can email One World Training using that same email address as shown on this slide. I hope that you have enjoyed this course, and I'd like to wish you good luck in your ITIL 4 Foundation exam. Thank you and goodbye.